Why this book? I'd like to share a story with you first that will explain how this book came to be. To understand the multidimensionality of this book, I need to sketch a background of how I see my own multidimensionality and how I am working directly with those parts of my soul that are trained in magical storytelling in other incarnations. People sometimes wonder, why do you need to know about past lives? What good does it do to dig into the past? How is knowing the past going to help you now? And the answer is because it's all connected and it's all happening simultaneously, something that I will get into later in the book. And by sharing the stories from the past, also known as other times in space frequency creation, you get to connect the dots and fill gaps that were question marks before. So travel with me and step into the time machine. The true history of the Banfili and Bandri, female poets and female druids. The Banfili. A Banfili is a female poet in ancient Celtic society, and female poets held a respected position in Celtic culture, preserving history and mythology through their storytelling. Ban means woman or female, and filit or fili means poet or bard. And when referring to multiple banfili, you say banfili, or a more official term is banfilit. Bandrui. A Bandrui is a female druid. Druids were members of the educated and religious elite in Celtic society, and this includes women who were spiritual leaders, healers, and advisors. More will follow on that later. So again, Ban meaning woman or female, Drui means druid. When referring to multiple Bandrui, you just say Bandruit. You may also hear or read the term Banduri, and this is a Romanized or Latinized form that was used by Roman historians to refer to the term Druids. If you are reading this, then you are no doubt on your own mystical journey. A part of that journey for me has been sharing mystical history with the people in a creative way. I studied art, history, mythology, and was talking to angels and fairies and creating artwork and never stopped. It just shifted and changed. 18 years ago, I went to Ireland for the first time when I was 20 years old. The friend with whom I traveled there unexpectedly went home after barely 3 days, leaving me alone in Ireland, and it was great. I traveled on my own for a few days, and it was all divinely orchestrated because it was an activation of my druid self that took place there. I cried on the plane back home and felt like I was leaving home. I went back in 2012 because I had a flight to the US to catch from Shannon in Ireland to Phoenix. So I spent 2 days exploring the area, and a new activation took place of a whole new area of the country. I had always been fascinated with fairy lore and witchcraft, so I was meant to end up there to get that activation. even though at that age I had not yet remembered the past lives there to the extent that I do now. Little did I know back then that it was my path to become a modern day female bard or druid and a mystical storyteller, a Banfili. I have talked about my vivid druid memories in other stories and how it was difficult to find stories in the history books that explained who the druids truly were, until I bumped into Oliver Huntley, an Essene druid and sacred land guardian of the Emerald Vale in Wales, and Ryan McKenna, ancient Scotland and Ireland expert, and I went on an 8-week initiation with them into the world of Celtic Christianity, which happened relatively late on my journey. I'd already been working for years on my own with fairy magic, the angels, the Akashic records, and star ancestors, and had a pretty solid foundation in Essene mystery school teachings and Aramaic through a prior initiation into Aramaic that I'd received from Oliver and Dale Allen Hoffman. But it was on that 8-week adventure with Oliver and Ryan into the world of Celtic Christianity that all the separate puzzle pieces that I'd had suddenly all fit together. How Christianity was pagan, and how the Fae were the truest form of feminine Christianity that I'd ever encountered, and why, of course, the Druids were female. It was all so obvious suddenly. I already studied enough of Gnosticism to know that Jesus, Yeshua ben Joseph, the person that we know as Jesus, traveled extensively. He spent a big chunk of his younger years in the Essene Druid school of Britain, where his uncle Noah had become a high Essene priest within the Druid order. Anna, his grandmother, had become a high Druid priestess during her own travels in Britain. There is so much overlap between the Druid teachings and the original Essene teachings that it's too obvious. So let's dive into the Bandrui and the Banfili, also known as the women priestesses of the Celts that were silenced and erased from the history books by the Romans. To keep things simple, I will refer to the Irish terms for female druid, like I just discussed. These are Irish Gaelic or Gaelic, but in other forms of Gaelic, you may hear terms like ban bard, which is a female poet, a bard, and ban druid, and Scottish Gaelic, and the Welsh use bard for both male and female poets. Culturally speaking, this all applies to all of Ireland plus Northern Ireland, which is technically the UK, but let's not go there. To me, it's Ireland and always will be Ireland, and the British Isles being Great Britain, which consists of England, Scotland, and Wales. The Isle of Man, which is located in the Irish Sea, is a self-governing British Crown dependency. The Channel Islands, which are located off the coast of France. Both are British Crown dependencies but are not part of the United Kingdom or the British Isles. They are often grouped with the British Isles in a broader cultural sense. The Hebrides, a group of islands off the west coast of Scotland, split into Inner Hebrides, Skye, Mull, and Outer Hebrides, Lewis and Harris, Orkney Islands, located to the north of Scotland, Shetland Islands, even further north than the Orkney Islands, the Isles of Scilly, a small group of islands off the southwest coast of England, Anglesey, an island off the northwest coast of Wales, and I talk about Anglesey in my dragon story. angels and dragons and other things in relation to the Roman attacks on the Druids. Plus, there are numerous smaller islands scattered around Great Britain and Ireland, such as the Isle of Wight off England's southern coast, and the Aran Islands off the coast of Ireland. In post Atlantean Celtic times, Ireland, as well as the British Isles, as described above, the Bandari were important figures in the spiritual and even political and intellectual life of the Celtic people. These women played key roles in shaping the society in which they lived. Unfortunately, though, their stories were silenced with the rise of Roman Catholicism. Back then, it was normal for women who knew that they were seers, healers, and magical storytellers to be accepted and to be celebrated for these gifts and talents. They were not just spiritual guides, but also scholars who possessed a deep understanding of the world around them, both the visible world and invisible one. What we now call, for instance, an Akashic Records reader, such as myself, were simply Banfili, magical storytelling women, who helped heal people through tuning into their soul story. The Druids, both male and female, were the intellectual elite of their tribes. It could take almost 2 decades to gain the knowledge and skills required to serve in this role, and their education covered a wide range of subjects, including tribal law, plant and mushroom medicine, alchemy, astronomy, and astrology. They acted as judges, healers, strategists, and spiritual leaders, organizing the intellectual and spiritual life of the Celtic people. I saw myself in 4th century Scotland, back then Pictland, also later known as Alba, standing in the middle of a roundhouse with all the important men of the tribe standing in silence as they listened to my advice. I was the only woman in the inner circle, while the other women were standing in a larger circle around the men. It was then, back in 2017, that I started researching and dove into the female druid rabbit hole. Because so much of our recorded history comes straight from the Roman annals, much of history has been written down through a Roman patriarchal lens. But there is evidence that women druids, the Bandri, were also among their ranks and held positions of influence and respect. Not all Roman writers ignored the women. Tacitus, a Roman historian, recorded how female druids, he called them the Banduri, defended their people on the island of Anglesey, like I already mentioned. He also wrote about the Celts not making any distinction between male and female rulers, with women often engaging in politics and diplomacy, something that I have seen in my own past life where a woman ruled the tribe. The Bandri were not only spiritual leaders, but were also, like I already mentioned, also involved in local politics and social affairs. Plutarch observed that Celtic women participated in assemblies, mediated disputes, and negotiated treaties, roles that were typically reserved for men in Greek and Roman societies. Pomponius Mela wrote of virgin priestesses on the Isle of Senna, modern-day Ile-de-Seine, in Brittany, who had the ability to foresee the future. These accounts show the wide range of responsibilities held by the female druids, and their significance in druidic society cannot be overlooked. Several notable bandrui have been preserved in history and mythology. For example, Gana, a druidess who traveled to Rome and was received by the Emperor Domitian. Another is Fedelma, a Banfili or female poet who served in the court of Queen Maeve. The most famous descendant of Abandrui is believed to be Queen Boudica, the leader of the Iceni tribe, who spearheaded an uprising against Roman rule in Britain. Though many names have been lost in time, these examples show that women were well respected when it came to spirituality and politics in pre-Roman times. Despite efforts by the Romans and Roman Christians, not Celtic Christians, who were basically Druids, like Saint Patrick, to suppress Druidism, through the destruction of sacred books and the desecration of holy Druidic sites. The wisdom of the Druids, including that of the Bandrui and Banfili, never disappeared completely. The knowledge survived because people passed down stories of their ancestors, of the land, and the true history, although those stories are now that what we know as mythology and legends. When I was walking through Brú na Bóinne, also known as the Boyne Valley, in 2006 in Ireland, with its ancient megalithic sites such as Newgrange, I could feel the Elven looking at me from the invisible realms and sharing their stories with me. This is the lifetime that came to me first when I was catapulted into the Akashic Records, and her role was mixed. A storytelling, healing oracle, and future seer, who was also politically engaged and setting traps for the Romans and hiding in trees with a bow and arrow. It was definitely an interesting incarnation to start remembering again. And just as the traditional women druids channeled their oracular wisdom through art, music, and stories, I have always expressed myself in different ways: painting, crocheting, candle making, dancing, martial arts, photography, story writing. More and more, I'm becoming the all-around magical storyteller. Writing this book, Step into the Time Machine, is a beautiful combination of visual art and stories meant to bring you with me in the realms where I can walk and travel, and I hold your hand and guide you through these worlds with me as you read the stories. I feel as though I am continuing the legacy of the Bandri and honoring my own parallel incarnation that has been actively supporting my journey since 2017 when she showed herself to me. By taking you with me in the Akashic Records, I am reconnecting you with ancient myths and legends in a way that speaks to your own experiences and helps you to understand your place in the greater cosmic narrative. To get the full effect of this chapter, I highly recommend that you get the book where you can see all the images and pictures too.